The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Kensington Palace as Prince Alexander rushed through the ornate corridors, his footsteps echoing against the centuries-old walls. The urgent message from his private secretary had pulled him from an important trade meeting, and the gravity in Lord Pemberton's voice suggested something far more serious than the usual palace drama. Alexander burst through the heavy oak doors of the throne room antechamber to find chaos unlike anything he had witnessed in his 35 years as heir to the throne of Britannia. Queen Consort Victoria stood rigid near the towering windows, her normally composed demeanor cracked like fine porcelain. Across the room, his beloved wife Princess Catherine sat in stunned silence, her hands trembling as she clutched a formal document that would change everything. The palace guards stood at attention, their faces carefully neutral despite the tension that filled the air like smoke from a raging fire. Lord Pemberton approached Alexander with measured steps, his weathered face bearing the weight of delivering news that no royal advisor should ever have to share. Alexander's eyes swept the room, taking in every detail. The ancient tapestries seemed to watch silently as history unfolded before them. The golden crown jewels display case caught the morning light, casting rainbow reflections across the faces of those present, as if the very symbols of their monarchy were bearing witness to its potential destruction. Victoria's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Her words were measured, calculated, and delivered with the precision of someone who had spent decades navigating the treacherous waters of royal politics. She spoke of duty, of protecting the crown's reputation, of making difficult decisions for the greater good of the realm. But beneath her composed exterior, Alexander could see the storm brewing, the carefully controlled anger that threatened to break free. The document in Catherine's hands contained accusations that seemed impossible to believe. Financial irregularities, questionable associations, activities that could bring scandal to the royal family when they could least afford it. The press had been circling like vultures for weeks, sensing weakness in the monarchy's carefully constructed facade. Alexander moved toward his wife, his protective instincts overwhelming his royal training. Catherine looked up at him with eyes that held a mixture of fear, confusion, and determination. She had always been the strongest person he knew, facing public scrutiny and media pressure with grace that impressed even her harshest critics. But this was different. This threatened not just her reputation, but their marriage, their children's future, and the very foundation of their family. Lord Pemberton began explaining the legal complexities involved. The Crown Prosecution Service had been pressured to investigate certain financial transactions connected to Catherine's charitable foundation. While no formal charges had been filed, the investigation itself was enough to create a constitutional crisis. The monarchy relied on public trust, and any hint of scandal could destabilize the government and threaten the delicate balance of power that had evolved over centuries. Victoria's supporters in the palace had been working behind the scenes for months, gathering evidence, building their case, preparing for this moment. They argued that swift action was necessary to protect the institution itself. Personal feelings, they insisted, must be set aside in favor of the crown's survival. The precedent of royal family members facing legal consequences was not without historical foundation, and they cited numerous examples of difficult decisions made for the greater good. Alexander felt his world tilting as he processed the implications. The woman he loved, the mother of his children, the future queen of their realm, was being painted as a threat to everything his family had spent generations building. The irony was not lost on him that Victoria, who had once faced her own struggles for acceptance within the royal family, now stood as Catherine's primary accuser. The palace staff moved quietly through the adjoining rooms, their usual efficiency shadowed by an understanding that they were witnessing something that would be whispered about in royal circles for decades to come. The head of security briefed Alexander on the media situation developing outside the palace gates. Reporters had begun gathering, sensing the story that was about to break across the front pages of every newspaper in the kingdom. Catherine finally spoke, her voice steady despite the circumstances. She addressed Victoria directly, asking for the chance to defend herself, to present her side of the story, to protect not just her own reputation, but the crown itself from the damage this confrontation could cause. Her words were chosen carefully, demonstrating the diplomatic skills she had developed during her years as a senior royal. The financial records in question involve complex international transactions related to Catherine's global humanitarian work. The foundation she had established focused on children's education in developing nations, work that had brought positive attention to the royal family and strengthened diplomatic relationships around the world. The transactions that now seemed suspicious have been approved by multiple oversight committees and government agencies. Alexander studied the documents more closely, his legal training from Cambridge serving him well as he identified inconsistencies in the accusations. The timeline of events did not align with the narrative being presented. Key financial advisors who had been involved in the transactions had not been consulted before these allegations were made. The investigation appeared to be based on incomplete information and possibly malicious interpretation of standard international charitable practices. Victoria's chief advisor, a man known for his ruthless efficiency in protecting the crown's interests, presented additional evidence that painted Catherine's activities in an even more suspicious light. Photographs of meetings with international business leaders, records of private conversations, details of financial arrangements that could be interpreted as improper influence peddling. The case they had built was comprehensive and professionally presented. The constitutional implications became clearer as the morning progressed. If these allegations were proven true, Catherine would face not just personal disgrace, but potential criminal charges. The line of succession could be affected. Their children's future roles in the monarchy would be questioned. The stability of the government itself could be threatened if public confidence in the royal family collapsed. Alexander's mind raced through possible solutions, ways to address the crisis without destroying his family or the institution he was born to protect. The legal system demanded due process, but the court of public opinion operated by different rules. The 24-hour news cycle and social media would amplify every detail, every speculation, every partial truth until the reality became irrelevant compared to the perception. The head of Palace Communications presented a preliminary media strategy. Controlled releases of information, carefully worded statements that neither confirmed nor denied the allegations, a systematic campaign to shape public opinion while the legal process unfolded. The plan was sophisticated and had been successful in previous royal crises, but this situation was more complex than anything they had previously faced. Catherine's legal team, led by one of London's most respected barristers, arrived at the palace as the morning stretched into afternoon. Their preliminary review of the evidence raised significant questions about the investigation's methodology and motivations. They identified potential conflicts of interest among those making the accusations and pointed to procedural irregularities that could invalidate much of the case against Catherine. The international implications began to emerge as foreign ministry officials briefed Alexander on the potential diplomatic consequences. Catherine's charitable work had created partnerships with governments and organizations around the world. Her reputation was tied to Britannia's soft power and international influence. A scandal of this magnitude could affect trade relationships, security partnerships, and the kingdom's standing in international forums. Alexander's siblings arrived at the palace as news of the crisis spread through the royal family. Princess Margaret, known for her sharp political instincts, immediately began analyzing the situation from multiple angles. Prince Edward, fresh from his military service, offered a soldier's perspective on loyalty and protecting one's own. Their united front demonstrated the family's initial response to the crisis, but also highlighted the pressure that would build as the situation developed. The Queen herself remained notably absent from these initial discussions, leading to speculation about her health and her position on the unfolding crisis. Palace sources suggested she was receiving regular briefings, but had not yet decided how to respond publicly. Her eventual statement would carry enormous weight and could determine the outcome of the entire situation. Victoria's supporters continued to press their case throughout the day, presenting new evidence and arguing for immediate action. They painted themselves as reluctant participants in a necessary process, claiming to act only out of duty to the crown and concern for the monarchy's future. Their sincerity was difficult to question, even as their timing and methods raised suspicions about their true motivations. The financial experts brought in to review Catherine's charitable foundation presented their initial findings. The complexity of international charitable work, they explained, often required arrangements that could appear suspicious to those unfamiliar with the sector. Many of the transactions in question were not only legal, but represented best practices for ensuring charitable funds reach their intended beneficiaries in challenging international environments. Alexander's personal security detail reported increasing media attention and public interest in the developing story. Social media was beginning to explode with speculation, conspiracy theories, and demand for transparency from the royal family. The palace's traditional approach of dignified silence was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain in the face of modern communication realities. As evening approached, Alexander found himself alone with Catherine in their private quarters. Away from the advisors, lawyers, and political calculations, they faced each other as husband and wife, parents concerned about their children's future, and two people whose love had brought them through previous challenges but now faced the ultimate test. Their conversation would set the tone for everything that followed, determining whether they would face this crisis together or allow it to drive them apart. The palace around them settled into its evening routine, but the undercurrent of tension remained palpable. Staff members went about their duties with the careful attention of people who understood they were living through a moment that would be remembered and analyzed for generations. The weight of history pressed down on everyone involved, from the highest-ranking officials to the newest servants. Outside the palace walls, the kingdom went about its daily business, unaware that decisions being made in those ornate rooms would soon affect every citizen. The delicate balance between tradition and modernity, between personal freedom and public duty, between love and obligation, hung in the balance as one of the most powerful families in the world prepared to tear itself apart. The investigation deepens. The second day of the crisis dawned gray and overcast, matching the mood that had settled over Kensington Palace like a heavy blanket. Alexander had spent a sleepless night reviewing documents, consulting with legal experts, and trying to understand how their lives had been turned upside down so completely. Catherine moved through their private quarters with a determined grace that had first attracted him to her, but he could see the strain in the set of her shoulders and the way she held herself just a little too carefully. The breakfast room, normally a haven of family normalcy in their highly public lives, felt different now. Their children's laughter from the nursery upstairs seemed both precious and heartbreakingly fragile. How would they explain to their young son and daughter that their mother was being accused of crimes that could send her to prison? How could they protect their innocence while preparing them for the storm that was about to break over their family? Lord Pemberton arrived earlier than usual, his face grave as he carried new developments that had emerged overnight. The investigation had expanded beyond Catherine's charitable foundation to include her personal financial arrangements, business relationships she had formed before marriage, and even her family's commercial activities. The scope of the inquiry suggested a systematic attempt to build a comprehensive case rather than a response to specific allegations. The morning newspapers had begun to hint at the developing story, with carefully worded articles that stayed within legal boundaries while building public anticipation. The royal correspondents, masters of reading between the lines of palace communications, sensed something significant brewing. Their sources within the government and legal system were beginning to whisper about constitutional questions and potential arrests of senior royals. Victoria's legal team had worked through the night to prepare formal documentation that would force the Crown Prosecution Service to take action. Their strategy was becoming clearer. Create a situation where the authorities had no choice but to pursue charges regardless of the evidence's quality or the political consequences. Once the legal machinery was in motion, personal relationships and family loyalty would become irrelevant. Alexander's phone rang constantly with calls from government ministers, foreign ambassadors, and family members seeking information about the crisis. Each conversation revealed new dimensions of the problem they faced. The Prime Minister was concerned about parliamentary questions and the upcoming state visit from the American president. The Archbishop worried about the Church's relationship with the monarchy. European royals offered support while carefully distancing themselves from potential scandal. Catherine's brother arrived at the palace mid-morning, his face set with the determined protectiveness of family facing external threat. He brought with him a team of private investigators who had been quietly working for months to understand the forces behind the current crisis. Their preliminary findings painted a picture of coordinated opposition that went far beyond simple concern for royal propriety. The financial investigation revealed patterns that suggested sophisticated planning rather than legitimate law enforcement. Bank records had been subpoenaed using emergency provisions typically reserved for terrorism or national security cases. International agencies had been contacted through channels that bypassed normal diplomatic protocols. Someone with significant influence and resources was orchestrating events to ensure maximum damage to Catherine's reputation and position. Alexander's military contacts provided intelligence about unusual activities in the security services. Surveillance that should have been routine had been intensified around Catherine's associates. Communications that should have remained private had been monitored and recorded. The investigation was beginning to look less like law enforcement and more like a political operation designed to remove Catherine from the royal family. The children's nanny brought word that photographers had been spotted near their school, prompting immediate security upgrades and contingency plans for protecting the young royals. The crisis was expanding beyond the palace walls to threaten innocent children who had never chosen the public life thrust upon them. Alexander's protective instincts as a father clashed with his obligations as future king in ways that tore at his soul. Victoria's afternoon press conference was masterfully orchestrated to appear reluctant and sorrowful while delivering devastating accusations. She spoke of painful decisions made for the greater good, of loyalty to the crown superseding personal relationships, of a need for transparency and accountability in modern monarchy. Her performance was convincing enough to sway public opinion while maintaining plausible deniability about her true motivations. The legal experts Catherine had retained presented their analysis of the case against her. The evidence, they concluded, was largely circumstantial and based on interpretations of normal business practices that could be construed as suspicious by those determined to find wrongdoing. Several key documents appear to have been altered or presented out of context. Witnesses have been coached to emphasize negative interpretations of routine events. Alexander's sister Margaret provided crucial support by publicly questioning the timing and methodology of the investigation. Her statement to the press highlighted the constitutional implications of prosecuting senior royals without following established protocols. She pointed out that similar financial arrangements have been used by other royal family members without triggering investigations, suggesting selective enforcement designed to target Catherine specifically. The international charitable organizations that had partnered with Catherine's foundation began releasing statements of support. Their testimony contradicted many of the allegations, providing documentation of proper procedures and successful outcomes from the projects in question. The real-world impact of Catherine's work became clear as education ministers from developing nations praised her foundation's contributions to their children's futures. Evening brought a private meeting between Alexander and the Queen, their first direct conversation since the crisis began. The elderly monarch listened carefully to his account of events, asked pointed questions about the evidence, and demonstrated the sharp political intelligence that had guided the kingdom through decades of challenges. Her perspective on the situation would prove crucial to determining the royal family's official response. The Queen's questions revealed her understanding of the deeper implications beyond the immediate accusations. She probed about potential motivations for the attack on Catherine, connections between current events and longer-term political movements, and the likely consequences of different response strategies. Her decades of experience in navigating royal crises provided invaluable guidance for addressing this unprecedented situation. Alexander's conversation with his grandmother also revealed her concerns about the monarchy's future in an increasingly democratic world. Public opinion could no longer be managed through traditional royal privilege and aristocratic connections. The modern media environment required sophisticated communication strategies and genuine transparency rather than carefully crafted public relations campaigns. The palace communications team worked furiously to prepare response strategies for various scenarios. If charges were filed, they needed statements ready that maintained dignity while asserting innocence. If the investigation expanded further, they required legal frameworks for protecting other royal family members. If public opinion turned decisively against Catherine, they needed contingency plans for managing succession and constitutional questions. Catherine's personal diary, seized during a search of their private quarters, provided investigators with intimate details about her thoughts and feelings during key periods. The violation of privacy was devastating on a personal level, but the diary's contents actually supported her version of events while revealing the emotional toll of constant public scrutiny and family pressure. The financial forensics team discovered evidence of electronic surveillance that went far beyond legal investigative techniques. Catherine's phones had been monitored, her emails intercepted, her movements tracked using resources typically reserved for threats to national security. The scope of the operation suggested coordination between multiple government agencies and possibly foreign intelligence services. Alexander's military service had taught him to recognize warfare in its various forms, and he began to understand that his family was under attack from enemies who understood that destroying public confidence in the monarchy was more effective than any military campaign. The investigation was a weapon designed to destabilize not just his marriage, but the entire constitutional system. The evening news broadcasts featured expert commentary on constitutional law, royal prerogatives, and historical precedent for senior royals facing criminal charges. Legal scholars debated whether traditional royal immunity applied to modern circumstances and what procedures should govern prosecuting someone in the line of succession. The academic discussions masked the very real human cost of the crisis unfolding within the palace walls. Catherine's mother arrived at the palace as darkness fell, bringing with her the fierce determination of a woman defending her daughter against impossible odds. Her presence reminded Alexander that this crisis affected not just the royal family, but ordinary people who had never sought public attention, but found themselves thrust into an international spotlight that threatened to destroy their lives. The strategy session that concluded the day involved representatives from every aspect of royal life. Legal experts, security professionals, communication specialists, government liaisons, and family members. The complexity of coordinating a response that protected both personal and institutional interests while maintaining public confidence required careful planning and perfect execution. As Alexander returned to his private quarters late that evening, he found Catherine still awake, reading through legal documents by lamplight. Her determination to understand every aspect of the case against her demonstrated the strength of character that had made her such an effective royal family member. Together, they began planning their counterattack against forces that sought to destroy not just their marriage, but everything they had worked to build. Hashtag the counteroffensive the third day brought unexpected developments that shifted the balance of power in ways no one had anticipated. Alexander woke to find Catherine already dressed and preparing for what she called the most important meeting of her life. The private investigators her brother had hired had worked through the night and discovered evidence that would change everything about how they understood the crisis they faced. The revelation was stunning in its implications. The investigation into Catherine's charitable foundation had been initiated not by concerned authorities, but by a coordinated campaign involving political opponents of the monarchy, foreign interests seeking to destabilize the kingdom, and personal enemies within the aristocracy who had never accepted Catherine's rise from commoner to future queen. The evidence trail led through offshore accounts, encrypted communications, and a web of connections that revealed the true scope of the conspiracy. Alexander's anger was cold and focused as he reviewed the documentation. Phone records showed conversations between Victoria's advisors and known Republican activists. Financial transfers revealed payments to journalists who had written negative stories about Catherine. Email correspondence outlined strategies for timing the investigation to cause maximum damage to the royal family's reputation during a critical period for the monarchy. The morning strategy meeting included new participants, intelligence officials who had been quietly investigating threats to the royal family, counterterrorism experts who understood sophisticated influence operations, and legal specialists who dealt with national security cases involving foreign interference. The crisis had evolved from a family dispute into a matter of protecting the kingdom's constitutional stability. Catherine's foundation records, when properly analyzed by forensic accountants, revealed not financial irregularities, but an incredibly sophisticated charitable operation that had moved millions of pounds to worthy causes while maintaining perfect legal compliance. The complexity that had made the transactions appear suspicious actually demonstrated careful planning and professional management designed to ensure accountability and effectiveness. The international dimension became clearer as foreign ministry officials briefed the royal family on intelligence regarding hostile nations' efforts to undermine Western democracies by targeting their symbolic institutions. The monarchy, as one of the world's oldest and most respected royal families, represented a particularly valuable target for those seeking to demonstrate that traditional Western values and institutions could be destroyed from within. Alexander's phone call to the Prime Minister revealed the government's growing concern about the political implications of the crisis. Parliamentary opposition leaders were preparing questions about royal accountability and modern monarchy's role in democratic society. The investigation had provided ammunition for Republican movements that had been seeking opportunities to challenge the constitutional monarchy system. The medical examination Catherine underwent to document the stress-related health impacts of the investigation provided additional evidence of the personal cost of the attack on her reputation. Her physician's report detailed weight loss, sleep disruption, and anxiety symptoms consistent with severe psychological trauma. The human toll of political warfare was becoming impossible to ignore. Alexander's security detail reported suspicious activities around the palace that suggested ongoing surveillance by unknown parties. Vehicle license plates traced to shell companies, photographers using equipment more sophisticated than typical paparazzi gear, and communication intercepts indicating coordination between different groups monitoring royal family activities. The investigation was being monitored by those who had initiated it. The afternoon brought a breakthrough when Catherine's legal team discovered that key documents in the case against her had been fabricated. Digital forensics revealed that financial records had been altered using sophisticated software, email chains had been manipulated to change their meaning, and photographs had been doctored to suggest meetings that never occurred. The evidence trail was not just weak, but actively fraudulent. Victoria's response to these revelations was swift and calculated. Her representatives argued that the discovery of fraudulent evidence only proved the need for more thorough investigation, that someone was obviously trying to cover up Catherine's activities, and that the sophisticated nature of the cover-up suggested professional criminal involvement. She turned defensive evidence into additional attacks with the skill of someone who had spent years in political warfare. The palace's decision to go on the offensive marked a turning point in the crisis. Alexander authorized the release of selected evidence that demonstrated the coordinated nature of the attack on his wife, the involvement of foreign interests, and the fabrication of key accusations. The royal family's reputation for dignified silence was set aside in favor of aggressive truth-telling that caught their opponents off guard. The press conference Alexander held that afternoon was unprecedented in royal history. Standing beside Catherine in the palace's formal reception room, he methodically dismantled the case against his wife while presenting evidence of the conspiracy that had targeted their family. His words were measured but forceful, demonstrating both royal dignity and fierce protective determination. The media response was immediate and dramatic. News organizations that had been preparing to cover Catherine's potential arrest suddenly found themselves investigating the investigation. Journalists began examining the sources of their information, the timing of leaks, and the coordination between different elements of the story they had been told. The narrative began to shift from royal scandal to political conspiracy. International reaction provided crucial support for the royal family's position. Allied governments expressed concern about foreign interference in domestic affairs. Democratic institutions rallied to defend constitutional monarchy, and security services began sharing intelligence about broader efforts to destabilize Western societies through attacks on symbolic institutions. Catherine's first public statement since the crisis began was delivered with quiet strength that reminded everyone why she had been so effective in her royal role. Speaking directly to the camera, she addressed the accusations against her, the impact on her family, and her determination to continue serving the people of the kingdom regardless of personal cost. Her authenticity cut through the political calculation that had characterized much of the debate. The legal proceedings took an unexpected turn when Catherine's attorneys filed charges against those responsible for fabricating evidence. The criminal complaint included detailed documentation of fraud, conspiracy, and interference with legal proceedings. The tables had turned, with those who had initiated the investigation now facing potential prosecution themselves. Alexander's evening meeting with senior government officials revealed the broader implications of the royal family's fight back. The intelligence services had connected the attack on Catherine to a larger campaign of destabilization efforts targeting democratic institutions across Europe. The royal family's resistance had exposed a network that threatened not just monarchy, but democratic society itself. The public opinion polls conducted during the crisis showed surprising results that confounded political experts. Rather than turning against Catherine, the public appeared to be rallying to support her against what was increasingly seen as unfair persecution. The British sense of fair play was asserting itself in defense of someone who appeared to be facing coordinated attack rather than legitimate investigation. Victoria's isolation became apparent as other royal family members publicly supported Catherine and Alexander. The Queen's statement, carefully worded but unambiguous in its backing for Catherine, effectively ended Victoria's hopes of maintaining legitimacy for her position. The family had chosen sides, and Victoria found herself increasingly alone. The evening brought private reconciliation between Alexander and his grandmother, whose wisdom and experience had guided the royal response to the crisis. Their conversation revealed the Queen's long-standing concerns about Victoria's ambitions and her relief that the truth was finally emerging. The crisis had forced necessary changes that had been delayed for too long. Catherine's children were finally told an age-appropriate version of the events that had disrupted their lives. Their innocent questions about why anyone would want to hurt their mother forced their parents to confront the reality that public service inevitably involved personal sacrifice, and that love sometimes required fighting for those you care about. The international charitable organizations that had partnered with Catherine's foundation began a coordinated campaign to defend her reputation and highlight the real-world impact of her work. Children in developing nations whose schools have been built through her efforts, teachers whose training have been funded by her programs, and communities whose lives have been improved through her initiatives provided powerful testimony to her genuine dedication to humanitarian causes. The palace staff, many of whom had worked with Catherine for years, began speaking privately to sympathetic journalists about their experiences with her. Their stories painted a picture of someone who treated everyone with respect, worked harder than required, and genuinely cared about the people her position allowed her to help. The human side of the future queen emerged through the accounts of those who knew her best. As the third day concluded, Alexander and Catherine stood together on the palace balcony, looking out over the city they would one day rule together. The crisis that had threatened to destroy their marriage had instead strengthened their partnership and clarified their mission. They had learned that being royal meant not just enjoying privilege, but defending the institution against those who would destroy it for personal or political gain. #resolution and transformation. The fourth and final day of the crisis began with news that would reshape not just the royal family, but the entire political landscape of the kingdom. The Metropolitan Police, acting on evidence provided by Catherine's legal team, had arrested 3 individuals connected to the fabrication of evidence against the princess. The arrests included a former intelligence officer, a political consultant with ties to Republican movements, and a journalist who had received payments for writing negative stories about the royal family. Alexander woke to find the palace buzzing with activity unlike anything he had experienced. Security officials coordinated with law enforcement agencies. Communications specialists prepared statements that would frame the day's revelations, and legal teams worked to ensure that justice would be pursued without creating new constitutional crises. The machinery of government was finally working to protect rather than attack his family. The morning briefing revealed the full scope of what investigators had discovered. The conspiracy against Catherine involved at least 12 individuals across 4 countries, had been funded through a complex network of shell companies and cryptocurrency transfers, and had been planned for over 2 years. The sophistication of the operation demonstrated that the royal family had faced a threat far more serious than simple political opposition. Catherine emerged from their private quarters with a composure that reminded Alexander why he had fallen in love with her strength as much as her beauty. She had spent the early hours preparing for what would likely be the most important day of her public life, reviewing talking points with communications experts while maintaining the authenticity that had always defined her approach to royal duties. The Queen's decision to hold an emergency Privy Council meeting demonstrated the constitutional significance of recent developments. The formal gathering of senior advisors, government ministers, and royal family members had not been convened under such circumstances in living memory. The monarch's address to the council would set the tone for how the kingdom processed and moved forward from the crisis. Victoria's situation had become untenable as evidence of her role in the conspiracy emerged. Phone records showed coordination between her staff and those now under arrest. Financial records revealed payments that could only be interpreted as funding for the campaign against Catherine. Her position as queen consort was no longer sustainable, and discussions about her future began among the highest levels of government and royal administration. The international media descended on London as news of the arrests spread globally. Foreign correspondents who covered royal affairs recognized that they were witnessing events that would be studied by historians and constitutional scholars for decades to come. The story had evolved from celebrity scandal to international intrigue, to constitutional crisis, to dramatic resolution in ways that captured worldwide attention. Alexander's address to Parliament represented a historic moment in the relationship between monarchy and democratic government. Speaking from a dispatch box traditionally reserved for prime ministers, he outlined the threat that had been faced, the response that had been mounted, and the lessons that must be learned to protect democratic institutions from future attacks. His words carried the weight of both personal experience and constitutional authority. The legal proceedings moved with unprecedented speed as prosecutors worked to ensure that those responsible for attacking the royal family faced appropriate consequences. The evidence was overwhelming. The defendants' connections to foreign interests created national security implications, and the assault on constitutional monarchy demanded swift justice. The courts would demonstrate that no one was above the law, including those who attempted to manipulate it. Catherine's charitable foundation became the focus of renewed international attention, but now the coverage highlighted its genuine achievements rather than fabricated scandals. The schools built in developing nations, the scholarships provided to deserving students, the healthcare programs funded through careful financial management became symbols of what modern monarchy could accomplish when dedicated to service rather than privilege. The afternoon brought a private family meeting that included all senior members of the royal family, except Victoria. The discussion was frank about the mistakes that had allowed the crisis to develop, the changes needed to prevent similar attacks in the future, and the opportunity to strengthen the monarchy by learning from recent events. The crisis had forced necessary conversations that might otherwise have been delayed for years. Alexander's conversation with his children about the week's events was perhaps the most difficult of his life. Explaining to young minds why their mother had been attacked, how lies could be made to seem like truth, and why their family service sometimes involved personal sacrifice required finding words that were both honest and appropriate for their age. Their innocent questions highlighted the human cost of public service. The palace staff, from senior advisors to kitchen helpers, gathered in the main hall for an unprecedented address from both Alexander and Catherine. Their thanks to those who had remained loyal during the crisis, their recognition of the stress everyone had endured, and their commitment to protecting those who served the royal family created a moment of unity that strengthened the institution from within. The evening news broadcasts featured expert analysis of how the crisis had been resolved and what it meant for the future of monarchy and democratic society. Constitutional scholars noted that the royal family's willingness to fight back against false accusations, their cooperation with law enforcement, and their transparency about threats they faced had actually strengthened rather than weakened the institution. Victoria's departure from the palace occurred with the dignity that royal protocol demanded, despite the circumstances that made it necessary. Her belongings were removed quietly, her staff reassigned to other duties, and her apartments prepared for whatever future arrangements would be made for someone whose role in recent events had made continued residence impossible. The international response to the crisis resolution included messages of support from heads of state, expressions of concern about foreign interference in domestic affairs, and renewed commitments to protecting democratic institutions from sophisticated attacks. The royal family's experience had revealed threats that extended far beyond any single country or institution. Catherine's first public appearance after the crisis involved visiting one of the schools her foundation had helped establish in London's East End. Her interaction with the children, teachers, and parents demonstrated why she had been so effective in her royal role and why the attacks against her had ultimately failed. Authenticity could not be fabricated or destroyed by those who dealt only in manipulation and lies. The security review ordered in response to recent events revealed vulnerabilities in how the royal family was protected from modern threats. Traditional concerns about physical safety had to be expanded to include digital warfare, influence operations, and sophisticated psychological attacks designed to destroy reputations and relationships. New protocols would ensure better protection against future threats. The legal aftermath of the crisis would continue for months as prosecutors built cases against those responsible for the conspiracy. International cooperation would be required to pursue charges against foreign participants. Diplomatic pressure would be applied to countries that had allowed their territory to be used for planning attacks, and intelligence sharing would be enhanced to prevent similar operations. Alexander and Catherine's marriage had been tested by forces that would have destroyed many relationships. Their decision to face the crisis together rather than allowing it to drive them apart had strengthened their partnership and clarified their shared commitment to serving the people of the kingdom. The experience had made them better prepared for the challenges they would face as future sovereigns. The constitutional implications of the crisis would be studied and debated for years to come. The precedents set during the investigation, the royal family's response, and the resolution of conflicts between personal loyalty and institutional duty would provide frameworks for addressing future challenges to constitutional monarchy in democratic society. As evening fell on the fourth day, Alexander and Catherine stood once again on the palace balcony, but the view had changed dramatically. The crowds gathered below were supportive rather than hostile. The media coverage was finally accurate rather than manipulated, and their future together seemed secure rather than threatened. The crisis that had begun with accusations of wrongdoing had ended with the exposure of actual crimes and the strengthening of both their marriage and the institution they served. The palace lights reflected off the Thames as London settled into its evening routine, but The events of the past 4 days would resonate through history. A constitutional monarchy had been attacked by sophisticated enemies and had emerged stronger through its response. A marriage had been tested by extreme pressure and had survived through mutual support and shared commitment. A future queen had been falsely accused and had proven her innocence while exposing her accusers. The transformation of the royal family from victims of conspiracy to examples of resilience would inspire democratic institutions worldwide. The lessons learned about modern threats to constitutional government would inform security policies for years to come. The victory of truth over manipulation would remind future generations that authentic service and genuine character ultimately triumph over political calculation and personal ambition. Most importantly for Alexander and Catherine, they had learned that their love for each other and their dedication to their people could survive any test. The crisis had ended, but their story as partners in service to their kingdom was just beginning. Together, they would face whatever challenges awaited them with the confidence that came from having survived the ultimate test of their relationship and their fitness to rule.